Hello, welcome to my presentation. My name is Marton Kodok, and today I'm going to talk about cloud workflows. So let's see what this is all about, and I brought you live coding examples as well. Hopefully there will be time to run those demos as well. So about me in a short notice. I'm a huge profile user on Stack Overflow by answering questions to you. I built out a large reputation there. You can find me under Pentium 10 eventually. I answered some of the cloud, Android, serverless questions, BigQuery and so on for you. I'm a Romanian, but I'm born Hungarian. So I know 3 languages and my English is better than my Romanian as well. I'm a GDE on cloud technologies since 2016, so it's been quite a while and I'm enjoying this and to actually talk to you and to bring amazing technologies every DevFest season. I'm a senior architect at REA and I'm actually developing scalable backend applications for websites, for mobiles and so on. I have my slides on SlideShare and I write articles on Medium. There isn't a paywall, so you can go and check it out as well. So let's go and see what we have for today. Our agenda for today is to actually discuss a bit challenges in connecting services. What is actually cloud workflows? I brought some practical use cases in order to see how is an anatomy of a workflow. We will see what's new in workflows because Cloud Next was recently and there has been some nice announcements there. So let's dive into those new examples. Let's see. So when we talk about challenges in connecting services, so there are a bunch of reasons why people connect things, but also they are seeing it that connectivity should be easy, but in reality you need to figure it out. So you need to build out parsers, even if it's not JSON, then you need to be XML or different parsers as well. You eventually, when you connect something, you need to have a conditional decisions and step executions as well. Why I'm saying this and how you should look at all these challenges in connecting services is that these are pain points that every developer on a new project faces, and it needs to actually find a way to resolve this and not to repeat constantly all this. So actually, when you start a project, there is no built-in error handling, no built-in logging. You are struggling with polling or retries or exponential in the backup. You always need to use your library or write the library for this. And when we talk about architecture and running it somewhere, nowadays scaling up and down to zero is also an aspect that we need to learn and we need to know what these are. Actually, it's much more important nowadays down to zero, which is the serverless word introduced us, and scaling up as traffic demand requires it. Nonetheless, authentication is something strange. You need to always have a way to actually authenticate either per item or the whole API endpoint, and you need to actually build around your services to face these features as well. And nonetheless, you miss capability of capturing callbacks. So nowadays, when there is an async and event-driven programming, you need callbacks in order to have external callbacks into your connecting services. So these are some pain points and something that we need to figure it out down the road. But I'm told all this to you because Cloud Workflows actually addresses a lot of these pain points by out-of-the-box features, and it's actually a nice way to connect services. Meet Cloud Workflows. Cloud Workflows is part of Google Cloud Platform. It's a step engine, to say so, and it's on top of all the services, all the APIs that are available on HTTP service. So right now, if you want to actually see it, workflow can orchestrate and integrate anything that's, let's say, a serverless service, compute service, from VMs to Cloud Run, Cloud Functions, also Google APIs like Document AI or Natural Language Processing API, or any other API that's part of the Google ecosystem as well. And nonetheless, you can actually call and look and hook in your workflow external APIs. So you can actually call SaaS APIs, private APIs, or other cloud APIs. Here you need to handle the authentication, but for the Google Cloud Platform, it automatically handles authentication. In a nutshell, there is a lot to talk about cloud workflows, but I just want to highlight a few key features here that nowadays people look into working with cloud workflows, trying out workflows, or actually resolving complex examples with cloud workflows. What we have here is that essentially GCP Workforce is a step automation as a service. You need to understand everything which is HTTP based. You can actually connect and jot at the steps in order to work it together. It has a declarative workflow language. It's YAML mainly, and it's actually very easy to construct a YAML. It's easy for everyone to understand. I would say even kids can write YAML and can write workflow languages. It has a decent pricing. I'm mentioning because it's a managed service, so it's run by Google. It's serverless, and it's run on the infrastructure, on their infrastructure as well. It has built-in decision and condition execution, so you can run if conditionals, switch statements, all this kind, in order to actually leverage the workflow capability, because when you have a step, you need to decide the thing that you are going path A or path B as well. It has some workflows, so you can find out on the internet a lot of examples, and you can copy paste those recipes inside your YAML file, because some workflow defines an action, like for example running a query on BigQuery. That could be a sub workflow that you are going to call it. Support for external APIs out of the box, and this is an awesome feature. I will demo this feature as well. It integrates with any Google Cloud product without worrying about authentication. This is a nice feature. You need to actually call the API of the Google Cloud service, and if the service account that's being used by the workflow when it started has access to that information, it works out of the box. And callbacks feature opens solutions for async or human in the loop orchestration task. This is an awesome feature, because you can, for example, have a workflow where in order to advance to the next step, you need a person's approval. So that happens, let's say, tomorrow. And workflows let you to do this in order to actually finish your workflow later. We will see how this callback feature is going to change our ways of orchestration. So it has enterprise security. It works based on Google Cloud Services with authentication built in for your services. You don't need to maintain any library or change or swap keys and those kind of things. It also has integration with Secret Manager. It means that the secrets API keys can be stored in Secret Manager, and the workflow can read it when it needs, for example, for an external API for it. So let's dive more deep and let's see what is a cloud workflow. What is the anatomy of a cloud workflow? I've tried to create an example that provides you the most overview of the anatomy. So when you start to actually to kick in a workflow, you may have some parameters. It's optional, but you may have some parameters, and then the workflow gets into the running state. it will run several steps because the workflow will have several steps of it. When it finishes, it goes into the succeeded state. So that's the green way, and that's the easiest way to actually see it. But the workflow could also do some other tasks. It could, for example, have an issue with one of the steps, so it can time out. There is a retry policy you can set up for the step itself, so it will actually try this many times, or 5 times, 10 times as you have set up, but eventually it could time out and then the workflow will fail. Also, the workflow can set up a callback. And a callback is like listening, observing something. So it sets up a callback endpoint and it pauses itself. It means that it waits for an external job or an external call to come on that callback and to signal it that I should continue. That think it as an input and think it as an async input. Think it like tomorrow a person pushes a button and that button continues the workflow based on parameters that the user has added there. So this is actually a good way to actually add human in the loop concept in order to the workflows. Normally exceptions can happen because developers can make mistakes or one of the steps can fail intermediarily. So when there is an exception, the workflow goes into the fail steps. But this is the anatomy of a cloud workflow. Good. I'm checking questions as well, so if you have any question, please type it in the YouTube comments section as well. Let's go next. When we are developing for cloud workflows, we are defining a YAML file with a step name and let's say a body for the workflow and eventually a return statement. This is just the basic of Hello Cloud Workflows. Then, in order to deploy it, there are other ways to deploy it, but how I am going to show you is that using the gcloud utility, you can deploy the workflow name and the source file for it. By executing, you have the ability to pass parameters or not, or just trigger the execution as well. And describing, you are able to describe the execution as well, but you are able to describe the last one. Last one is helpful for developers for development purposes because it will quickly describe your last workflow execution. So this snippet, it tells that it succeeded, the result was Hello Cloud Workflow, and there are some start time, end time information there. There was no arguments added to it, and this is the execution, let's say hash. It's not a hash, but it's an URI that describes this execution as well. Sample workflows. Let's see how these are going to help us in nowadays world. And I'm telling you about cloud and everything that orchestrating the cloud. So basic examples to complex examples later. So you have IT management automation. You could have a 9 a.m. trigger. This could be a cloud scheduler to actually start a compute engine VM. You could wait for 60 seconds and, for example, if something malfunctioned, you could log the event and notify the team on Slack that something didn't start it. This is just a basic example combining cloud scheduler that triggers the cloud workflow. The workflow issues a compute engine start call. It waits for 60 seconds, then it will check if the compute engine booted up and it's there. So you can orchestrate all these services together, then you can notify it on the Slack if there is an error or it's something wrong. Some other example, workflows in your application. So you can have steps for processing an invoice generation. You could receive an order that creates, let's say, triggers a workflow where you need to create an invoice. Creating an invoice is a step that's done by a component of your app. It could be hosted, let's say, on App Engine, but it could be elsewhere as well. It could be Cloud Function or Cloud Run API as well. Then you need to generate a PDF. That's probably a Cloud Run service because it's best suited to run this kind of operation on Cloud Run. Send a PDF via email, It could be combined with Cloudrun and SendGrid as well. So grabbing the PDF and sending to SendGrid. This process could be part of the workflow itself. It could have 3 steps in order to run the workflow. And it will orchestrate some APIs to it. This is just a basic example to show you that we can build and connect different Google Cloud services next to it, and also some external services like SendGrid. So let's see what's next. Code examples. Code examples I've separated in 2 sections. One is the basics and one what's new in cloud workflows. So there will be a phase 2 of this presentation as well. So the basics are how to do HTTP calls, how to sequence 2 steps, and working with sub workflows. Essentially, when we are making an external HTTP post request, it comes down to these 13 lines of code. These 13 lines of code have a name for the step, have an action. Here under the call keyword, you said that I'm going to execute HTTP post statement. You set the arguments, which is, let's say, the URL. You have the headers, authorization, content type. The token here is literally visible and it's added there. It's not the recommended way. We will see how this challenges Secret Manager and how we integrate Secret Manager to read the token. Then you have the parameters for this shortened call, which is, let's say, using bit.ly domain, have this long URL shortened. Then you have the result variable where to store the result, and then return the result body statement. So this is just a basic post example, and here is the output, which means the link which was added inside the body statement is this short link. The wrong URL I truncated for the sake of the presentations. Now, if I want to sequence 2 steps, essentially I can run, for example, a get statement to a URL, let's say a cloud function. I can store the result, which is a JSON statement, if you may ask. This is a JSON statement, and in the current time you get the JSON itself, and in the, let's say, the body variable, you have the JSON variables that you define and you return with the service. So reading this current time variable, the next step is actually passing the current time day of the week as a search for the Wikipedia service, and this returns the search for that keyword as well. Sub workflows, just quickly to show you what are sub workflows, then we will switch to the live demo. Sub workflows I define first here in the bottom, that you have a name message call which has 2 input parameters, and it does a string concatenation, just a basic example to show you how sub workflows are defined. Then when you define a sub workflow, you need to introduce 2 additional keywords, which is the main and the steps level, and then you have call sub workflow 1, call sub workflow 2. Here in the call statement you no longer have HTTP post, HTTP get, which I've shown you previously. You have name message, which is actually the name of the sub workflow. In the argument section you have the parameters added of the workflow, and the result is added, let's say, into a variable. So this way you are able to define sub workflows. Before jumping into what's new in the workflows, let's do a live demo of the basics. So here is the Google Cloud Platform, and essentially when you have a project you get your Google Cloud Platform and workflows. You can find workflows inside the menu as well, workflows, but I suggest using the search bar to jump to the workflow page. In the workflows page you will see your workflows defined, or you can create your new one. By creating a new one, you set here a name and the region where you want to run it, and then you get this nice editor where you can define your workflow steps, and here you have a visualization of your workflow, what it does. This is just a basic template that's defined there for you as a boilerplate to start with your workflow. Good. But we are programmers. So actually I'm a programmer. Maybe from my audience they are programmers that use the editors as well. So I'm jumping now to VS Code. VS Code is something that I use for daily development. Here I already set up the gcloud utility in order to connect to a project, and I also installed an extension. And here let me showcase you this GCP project switcher extension, which is authored by me. So this is my extension which I published on the Visual Studio Marketplace, and you are able to actually download the extension, and in the status bar you are able to see which project is active, and you are able to switch between your projects using this extension. It adds a good way to actually work in VS Code with this thing as well. Now, if I want, for example, to actually deploy this basic example, I need to run a command, which I put it here as a action pane in the action pane. And how do I put it in the action pane? VS Code provides you to have a VS Code folder and a task file where you are able to actually define a command in order to run different things. So the deploy command is actually running gcloud workflows deploy, and it's taking the name from the file and automatically the source file. Let's try it out. So I'm clicking deploy here in the pane, which is actually running this command in order to deploy it, and as you see it automatically deployed for it. If I'm hitting a keyboard, it encloses that window. I'm able to execute it. The execution will provide me an execution ID in order to read what that workflow produced. And when I run describe last command, I'm seeing that it returned hello cloud workflows. So these are the basics command to actually execute a workflow. I can here change, for example, hello GDG Doha, and I can run a command which is running deploy, running execution, and running describe. So I've set up a task for that. So essentially here you have seen quickly in the terminal a deploy, an execution, and a describe command. Hello GDG Doha is the execution for it. So the extension, there is a question, the extension is GCP Project Switcher. This is GCP Project Switcher. There is a question for that. So you can check it out. It's GCP Project Switcher. I'm pasting the link into the chat as well. Good. Now, let's do some much more advanced example. I mentioned that the Bitly system had in my slides screenshot the API token visible, but you can store in the secret manager the Bitly API key, and you can integrate traditionally with the HTTP GET statement, reading out from the specific URL. You can look up secret manager's API URLs from the manual. Then you can store the secret key response. It's a base 64 version. Then you need to decode base 64 version of it, and then you have it in a variable decoded secret Bitly, the variable, the API key, and then you can do a HTTP post statement in order to run the example for it. Now let's run this example, and I'm going to deploy it. So this runs gcloud workflows deploy, the name for the service and the file. It already finished, so it's very fast to actually work with cloud workflows. Then I'm going to execute, and I'm going to actually describe it. as well. And in the describe, you see that the response is a JSON, and the JSON has the short link as well. So the short link is here for that URL, which was cloudgoogle.com/blog. And this is an example that has these, 5 steps. So first step is defining the bit.ly API key name or the variable which is in the secret manager. Then it's reading the secret manager. Then it's decoding the base64 format of it. Then it does the HTTP post API key in order to shorten the link, and then it returns the body of the API call. But we will see it in a moment how this actually can be simplified with new features of Cloud Workflows. So let's go back to the presentation and let's go forward. So now that we know what are the basics of Cloud Workflows, let's go into seeing what's new in Workflows. I'm going to also checking the questions area as well. So what's new in Workflows? Functions, cloud logging, connectors, callbacks. So why I'm mentioning functions? Because it's very important when you are in a workflow that you need to work with a lot of strings. You need to search, substring it, find elements inside the strings, and all these operations need functions in order to help you. JSON as well, if you work with JSON content. Map are dictionaries or array, and these are iterating syntaxes. These are extremely good that workflow added it, and you are able to actually work with it in a declarative way to actually read out from your variables the logics that you are going to use in your workflow processes. Next, there is cloud logging and call logging. Maybe the two logging confuses you, but cloud logging is where you add custom log statements. So you are able to code syslog and you add additional log informations like printing on the screen, but because this is serverless and orchestration, you need to log your content to it. And call logging, it's a feature that automatically out of the box Cloud Workflows provides you for all the steps, essentially a very boilerplate response in the cloud login in order to see it where it is, how it's working out, and to actually help you in debugging as well. Next, there are connectors and callbacks. So essentially, connectors, we will see what those are, but these are built-in authentication, retry and long operation handling. So you are able to actually connect with services without knowing their HTTP endpoint, without building around authentication like I've shown you in the bit.ly API. There will be much more easier way for that. I'm demoing it in the next slides. Callbacks are something that when the workflow it pauses for 12 hours or for a year, it could pause for a year as well, and it enables you to actually signal the continuation of the workflow from outside. So it could wait for something on your application or on your platform to happen. It provides you async executions, or it provides human in the loop. So maybe someone next day adding and pressing a button. Let's see much more deep in these examples. So string functions, you can find these in the manual. JSON and map and iteration as well are manual, but these are basically in the dollar with the dollar syntax. You can write, like, for example, text split. This is the input and this is the separator, and it will return you an array of elements with using the comma as a separator. Find or rejects is something that I use it many times. I want, for example, this is just a basic example that the start time there is, and I want to locate the days of it. but I can have here many outputs and I can extract the days for it. I can run any regex statement in order to actually build it out. And there are others as well, like simple find all or replace all, as well substring, which is frequently used by me. So there is a bunch of examples for it. Good. Let's go next, because the advanced stuff is here. So workflow connectors. Workflow connectors are like client libraries. But here in the workflow, because it's not a programming language, it's a declarative YAML language, it sounds like a client library of it. Like you could add just the name of the library and it works out of the box. For other services, so it means that for other services like handling out, retries and waiting, so these features are built in when you use the connectors, and essentially connect to other Google Cloud APIs and to integrate other GCP products. Currently, connectors are offered for GCP APIs. A connector is actually a statement or let's say it's not a URL, it's not a HTTP endpoint, it's a statement where you need to figure out you don't need to figure out the API endpoint. You have in your manual this type of call statement that you need to use, and essentially it starts with Google APIs always. Then there is the service, like let's say BigQuery. There is a version, if the API has its version, like version 1, version 4, it may have a resource, let's say table, and an operation, create, or you could create a table. So these are definitions that you will find for all the Google Cloud products on the connectors manual. There is a manual for connectors. Then you are able to set the requirements for that connector, running a statement, executing a job, all the elements of that. Then I want to showcase you here that connector params has some timeout. You can have the defaults, you don't need these lines there, but you can customize these timeouts as well. So let's see how helps us these connectors and how it reduces syntaxes. So essentially, as I showed you before, if you wanted to call a secret manager traditionally using HTTP GET calls, you would have a call statement, and then you would have a decoded statement as well for base64. After, so when we use connectors, now we have the call statement, which is this one, and the variable which we are reading out from it, that's the secret ID. So this is the variable I created in the secret manager, and I need to read it out. And these 4 lines are actually reading the secret, and I don't need 15 lines for it. Let's see in it action. So I'm switching back to my VS Code as well, and now I'm going to show you, hopefully side by side, come on, yes. So essentially, on the left you have traditional way with HTTP GET statement and running the API call for the Bitly service. On the right you have a connector version of it, where you have the call statement, you have the Bitly API key, and that's all to actually integrate with Secret Manager. And then you can actually call it the API in order to shorten it. So connectors are a great way to actually reduce application way. So let's see what other examples I have here, because I have, for example, with BigQuery. So with BigQuery, this example showcases you BigQuery. So first of all, let's see this subroutine. So this is sub workflow, where you have the BigQuery, the query itself, the select statement, and then you are calling Google API's BigQuery jobs query statement. You pass the project ID, you pass the query, and the query result is being passed here in the document found step. So this is actually how you run a BigQuery statement. And in the top, you actually reference this name, BigQuery. As an argument, we have query. This is the select statement. Whatever it is there, you should not try to figure out what is the select statement. Then once the select is executed, you have here items, and there is a next step here. So next step is actually looping the items, because this is an array and I need to run an operation for every item of it. The looping the items is done here. Eventually it has an init statement where I define my looping step variable. I'm checking a condition that the looping should not pass on the last item, and I am processing an item where I'm leading out, and here there is a syntax that you need to actually figure out, but once you print it out items, you will figure out that you need to read out field 0 value in case of BigQuery in order to fetch the value of the item section. And this is actually an example of how do you loop a statement. Good. Now to go next, let's see what else is in the cloud workflow section. So if you have a connectors details, it's built-in authentication. I didn't had to actually wire in any permission for secret manager. The invoker who invokes the cloud workflows, then that will have access to the calling services as well. It has some retries, default timeout, and it has a long-running operation implementation. So it means, for example, in the BigQuery section as well, it's not like that. It runs, for example, 2 seconds, and then it will wait. The connector, it will wait, and it will do an internal polling that you don't need to implement it. So actually that's very helpful, because it's adding you a nice way to remove coding burden also inside your application. What long-running operation times are supported on the cloud workflows? So you have here a few operations: BigQuery, Cloud Build, Cloud Functions, Cloud SQL, Firestore, Cloud Spanner workflow as well, and these are helpful when you need to wait, and Cloud Workflow automatically offers that feature for you. Now, the last section for the what's new in cloud workflows are callbacks. Callbacks need 2 sections in the code, and essentially these are endpoints where the workflow will listen, will observe. So this is the syntax that you are going to use to create an endpoint, and this returns for you an URL. And then in the code workflow, you can pause the code workflow execution with events await callback. This way the workflow is paused until the external event is coming in. It's very helpful and a modern way to actually await syslib, wait, or tracking tables of any step executions, and polling if you have some operations for that. It's secured with authentication, so the webhook is it needs the authentication, so your services can quickly authenticate with your endpoints as well. And it provides you an event-based operation, so you can pause the workflow execution until the call is received on the endpoint. It's very helpful feature, this callback details, and it opens the way to actually do it in platform operations, or to do, let's say, human in the loop task where you need a person to actually validate something, and your workflow will continue when you call the callback endpoint of the workflow as well. Now, having cross-checked and working on the basics and what's new sections of the cloud workflow, Let's see what else we have here, and I just want to quickly go around some advanced sections of it, but I just want to mention it. So here there is a case to actually run a Firestore backup the easy way with Cloud Workflow. So out of the box, Firestore backups, they are not provided easily, but you can set up a cloud scheduler that trigger a Cloud Workflow, which will run a backup statement on Cloud Firestore, and it will place on cloud storage. This is a full tutorial and it's available on Marton, Kodok, medium.com. It's a longer story of it. Another example is to using Cloud Workflow to load cloud storage files into BigQuery. You have Cloud Workflow triggering, and there is a cloud storage read operation, read out what elements are, for example, in my bucket, and for each element I can load into BigQuery. Based on string functions, I can, for example, read out from files some variables like index or year, then it can write to the table as well. Another example, and it's a much more advanced example, which is also available on Medium, is to run share commands on Compute Engine VMs in a serverless way. So you will have an execution, a workflow that starts. It will authorize based on the service account and roles and permissions that you set up in order to have access to that VM, to that tunnel as well. In my example, I'm starting the VM, so I can run a start command for the VM. I can wait in order to boot it up. Then I can submit a cloud build job. The cloud build job will use Cloud IAP tunnel in order to connect with Compute Engine. There is a firewall setup that lets this tunnel to actually connect with cloud build, and then it can run the share command on the cloud, on the Compute Engine VM. Next, eventually when it's finished, it can stop the VM. This is all serverless because Cloud Workflows is serverless. You don't need to maintain a full service, full VM boot up. Cloud Build is task based, so you can actually trigger a task that will run the SSH command, and the permissions are handled by the service account which is invoking the Cloud Workflows. This is a full article available on Medium. You can check it out for advanced cases of you. Conclusions. Benefits of Cloud Workflows are many, but I can name only a few, like reliable workflow execution, low latency of execution, no call starts. So as you've seen in my demo on VS Code, it automatically deployed immediately. It automatically executed. There was no boot time. There is no 30 seconds waiting. There is no 2 minutes of booting. It has built-in error handling. I didn't demo this, but it works nicely with retry policies and other elements as well. It has a rich runtime with all the elements to actually run a versatile workflow engine for you. It has a callbacks feature, secret manager integration, and it's developer friendly. So I need to mention that it's something that developers love to use it because it's easy to build and operate. It scales out, does not lose state, handles errors, timeouts, out of the box support for Cloud API. So whenever you need to integrate Cloud Functions, PubSub, whatever, Cloud Scheduler or BigQuery, you can write the code in workflow in a YAML syntax, and you don't need to maintain any library, Node library, Python library in order to be up to date. It provides logs, so it's auditable, so you have an organization or an enterprise where every action needs to be audited, needs to be maintained. The workflow provides you that operation, and it provides you async workflows with callbacks. So these are some features to actually build out endless possibilities. So there are lots of ways to actually synchronize systems, do workflow based emails, promotions, or generate state machines, event-driven marketing workflow execution, all the elements of it. Let's check if there are any questions in order to answer those. And eventually this concludes my presentation about cloud workflows. Slides are available on SlideShare, Marton Kodok, so you are able to actually check it out and review all the elements of it, and you are able to ask questions on Twitter as well, or use the chat in order to answer it live in the session as well. Let me check again what are the questions. Yeah, thank you, Joseph, that you agreed it's awesome developer friendly. It's good to hear that you love this product. Hopefully you will find it out and build out simple and complex cases for your workflows. So essentially this concludes my talk, and you can reach me out on Twitter, LinkedIn, in order to actually discuss about some workflow elements of it. And don't forget, check it out, Marton Kodok, medium.com, where there are my articles, and hopefully see you on the next event, hopefully in person somewhere in the spring section as well. Thank you for having me. Bye.